let me introduce Guy Turgeon, the Chief Architect, Red Hat of North America for telco, media, and entertainment. My gosh, everything. Here you go.
The media entertainment is developing, but you'll hear more about that at some point. So I'm Guy Turgeon. I'm a Chief Architect at Red Hat, and I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. And that's where Ericsson chose to put their interoperability lab. They do some 5G lab there. But big kudos to Vodafone for choosing Malaga as a place to do their interoperability and their testing. So I really like that. So in my role, I work with various operators, and they're working through all the choices that Open RAN is bringing. So those choices present a lot of challenges. So the first challenge, I think, and probably the largest challenge, is just that multi-vendor challenge. And I'm really looking at this from a cloud platform perspective, right? There's obviously the challenge of O-RAN and interoperability of the RU and the DU. But in the cloud platform, now you have a unique situation. You're getting cloud-native functions from various vendors. At times, you're integrating on the same platform. Maybe not on the DU, but certainly where you're hosting the CU or the RIC, or even bringing in some of the distributed core components, they can reside on that same cloud platform. And then there's also the hardware side of things. You're dealing with accelerator functions. You're dealing with various servers. And you all have to go through that integration. Now, these challenges, they're not new to Red Hat. We never provided a fully integrated stack. We always had operating systems, middleware, and this is just the world we lived in. So we had to integrate, test, validate, certify on platform hardware servers. We had to test and certify with different applications. But that challenge is new to the NEPs. The NEPs have never experienced this. The hardware vendors, they've been experiencing this for a while. But the operators, it's completely new. So when they look at these solutions, they need to look and make sure that it meets the interoperability, the support, the life cycle, and the manageability of the solution. So how do you go about that? You do it through increased standardization, right? So O-RAN has done great, and it's going off, and it's tackling the cloud perspective as well. So they're defining interfaces for the manageability of the cloud platform. They're defining interfaces on how to do the life cycle management of the software. But standards are complicated to define. You have a lot of arguments in the standards body. I'm in work group 6. It's a mess in there. And then we often end up boiling things down to the least common denominator. And there's also a lot of different opinions on how things should move forward. So, but it is required, and that standardization is quite common to the wireless world. But one way to approach it, and this is what's been done in open source, is through adopting open interfaces. And if you adopt open source de facto standards, then you can accelerate the adoption of Open RAN. Now, Kubernetes is a good example of that. So even in the standards body, instead of defining all new APIs to do cloud-native deployments, they went ahead and they chose Kubernetes as a cloud-native platform with its already predefined APIs that you could do and deploy your workloads with. Another way to move forward is to leverage a broad partner ecosystem. So we're all too familiar with that multi-partner logo slide that everyone seems to have, right, when they do their presentations. But it's when you double-click on the actual integration that takes place that you realize that it's really weak. It falls apart. So you need partners that will certify the interoperability of their components. Now, if you certify the interoperability, then that means that you potentially have a situation where you can reduce a lot of the vendor friction, because one of the partners should be, and we've done this before, can be in a position to be that one throat to choke, or that taking that support call and managing that support requests and working with the partners in the background to ensure that or resolve the issue. Now, you can't just certify with one version. That certification needs to be continuous. So as each vendor goes through the life cycle of their versions, they need to keep that certification going. But it can't stop at just versioning. It's that life cycle. Every vendor has their own life cycle in terms of versioning. And if you're doing a full solution and you're deploying that solution, well, you need every element to be supported at the same time. So you need agreements within the ecosystem to make commitments in terms of the life cycle to be able to deliver these full stack solutions to the operators. Another good practice is to implement Devsecops. So Devsecops comes from the IT industry. It's not just Devsecops, it's CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and also GitOps. Now, this is something that you don't only do as a software developer providing your technology, but operators also need to adopt these concepts. And GitOps itself is a methodology where you adopt Git, which is just a source code versioning system, but you adopt it as that single source of truth. And within that, you define your hardware infrastructure, you define all your software, your versioning, and also all the configuration for it. Now, by adopting GitOps, you can then drive all the automation of your network from the bare metal, zero-touch provisioning, board bring-up, to the full deployment of the workloads, the provisioning, and then follow on with actually upgrading the system through its life cycle. But there's more you can still do with automation. There are concepts in Kubernetes and in cloud native, and Kubernetes itself uses them. Kubernetes is basically a set of controllers. And these controllers are essentially loops. And in that loop, you always have the current state, and you have the desired state. And Kubernetes is just simply always trying to reconcile to that desired state. Now, Kubernetes itself calls these controllers. We call them Kubernetes operators. So you can extend Kubernetes itself and put all that operational knowledge into your network functions to be able to do the lifecycle management of them and provision them. And you do that by using the simple Kubernetes constructs. You extend the API. And when you do this effectively and leverage Kubernetes operators, we are now in a situation where we no longer need element management systems for individual container network functions. And we are able to provide full automation. So just to finish up, if the community works together and we do alignment on our life cycles, we adopt good coding practices, we certify the interoperability, then I think we can accelerate network deployments, remove a lot of that current vendor friction, reduce operational costs, especially with automation, and quickly introduce new services, which is really what 5G has been about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy. We're going to go to a panel session on that very point of how Open RAN can accelerate network deployments in what we're doing. I'd like to invite to the stage for the panel Ganesh Shambagaraman, Head of Integrated Products and Ecosystem from Radsys. We'd also like to invite David Clough, CTO of Yeah, I've got WTT in here, on here. WWT. And also Azita Aravani, GM of Americas for Rakuten Symphony. Azita, do you want to start just by introducing yourself? And we'll come down the line a little bit. Obviously, we know Guy very well now. But please, introduce yourself. Who are you? And what do you do at Rakuten?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. I'm Azita Aravani. I'm General Manager of Rakuten Symphony Americas. And I run the business for Rakuten Symphony in America. What Rakuten Symphony does is offer tools and platform for being able to go from a traditional operator to having a cloud-native, Open RAN, and a massively automated network architecture and deployment. We are the sister company to Rakuten Mobile, which is the first in the world to offer 4G and 5G services using that Open RAN, cloud-native, and automated network. So,
thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
David, introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Dave Clough. I'm from Worldwide Technologies. We're one of the largest SI integrators in the world here. We're about $17 billion in business, based out of St. Louis, Missouri, but we have sites in Amsterdam, Mumbai, Singapore, throughout the world. I run the architecture and solution organization and do a lot of work right now with ORAN and other functions. So,
Ganesh, would you like to introduce yourself from Radsys?
Hi, Ganesh Shambagaraman. I'm heading the standardization and ecosystem partnership activities at Radsys. In my role, I take care of all the standardization activities with my team, and I am part of the ORAN forum, co-chairing one of the working groups, Working Group 8, which takes care of the software reference design. And I am also looking into the NFAPI standards evaluation. I am leading that activity along with other partners and companies who are part of the Small Cell Forum. So we are looking at all the Open RAN forums, and we are a member of many of these activities in the open source community in Open RAN or RAN Alliance. So we have been an industry partner for many of these vendors who are there right from the likes of Intel, and we work with a whole lot of ecosystem partners, including the audio vendors.
Thank you very much. So same as the similar session, I'm going to ask the question, then come down the line, maybe mix it up a little bit. But I think Guy, we heard from you around how you see from Red Hat how that the systems and the SI sort of work that you actually put in, particular certification, standardization certification, and using DevOps to do that. But Azita, from Rakuten's point of view, can we hear from you about how you feel Open RAN has actually accelerated the network deployments, especially from the systems integration sort of side that Symphony actually has brought together?
Right. So we believe that making sure that there's a lot of automation, as you were mentioning in your talk, is super important. So it's not just about opening the interfaces and having Open RAN. That's, of course, the beginning. But being able to marry that with the cloud-native trend, marry that with automation, that's where the efficiencies come about. So in terms of accelerating, we now have over 50,000 4G outdoors base stations. We have over 15,000 5G outdoors base stations. We have over 300,000 Open RAN radiating cells out there. So I think we have proven the model in Japan. So I would say in Japan, we're definitely killing it. In Germany, we're working with 1&1, where we are designing, planning, building the network end-to-end for them. And that's a 10-year journey that we will take with them. And that's going very well. We just announced that we have done this fixed wireless access with them with over 1 gigabits per second downlink plus 3 milliseconds of latency. So that's going very well. We've gone beyond we've successfully completed the trials with VMO2 in UK. And we have also announced our trials with MTN Group, both the 4G and 5G. So I would say we're doing a lot to accelerate the open deployment, and it's going quite well.
David, how's WWT been helping that acceleration deployment?
Right, so I think the key thing here is being able to demonstrate the technology and show that it's usable. So we do have an Open RAN implementation in our labs that we're able to demonstrate to customers and put forward. But I think the key things we've learned actually going through this and understanding and talking to customers is to understand where their fear, uncertainty, and doubt comes into play, and going back and addressing those particular areas. So what we've seen is that the technology is there. So there's a lot of good understanding around the technology and interoperability. There is more work that needs to go on here. There is availability that has to go on with radio suppliers and other things to interoperate for. So we've done a good job of telling the radio operators what frequencies are needed for what customers so they can accelerate that process. And then we've done a lot of work to actually build out the business environment so that Open RAN can be successful by bringing together various consortium members to make sure that they understand what's required for the longevity. So it's much different type of situation than when you normally sell services for a server or a virtualized environment, where typically that's only like a 3-year cycle, depreciation cycle. So we've had to go and work with folks and say, look, you really need to be able to think about this for 7 years. And that's really helped understand and be able to train, actually change the way the discussion goes with an operator so that when I bring a server company to the operator, they're like, all right, I've got this ready for 7 years. I can go up to 10 years on this life cycle in the system. I can support that over through the system and make sure that you're able to be whole. The other part of that as well is making sure that we have the right structure for support and interfaces on those particular systems. So, we talk about a lot of technology, but once the technology gets deployed, you have to maintain it. So who's responsible for what? How they keep those interfaces open? That's very critical. And being able to put the right orchestration and automation against that. So the other thing we've learned is it's one time to do one iteration. And I learned this on a very early version of solutions. You put it out there once, you get it working, okay, then you get an upgrade. That upgrade cycle, if not everybody's bought into the upgrade cycle and supporting it, you have to scrap the system sometimes. And you have to go back to normal and get to normal APIs where everybody understands to make sure that that works over that lifetime. That's another key area. And that under orchestration automation, that's absolutely critical. And then that feeds into how I keep and maintain that from a support model. Who's responsible for what, where their barriers are in the system. That's also been undefined in some cases. So being able to say, here's a test methodology, here's where you stop and here's where you start. This is actually critical, and it's key for those areas. A lot of things that we work through, oftentimes we get pulled in, and it really comes down to the people who have got the biggest ideas that solve the problem. But if you can adequately tell the person, the vendor, this is your problem, you need to fix this, and that we're responsible, and have clarity there, that's key, and those open interfaces are critical for that function.
Thank you, David. Ganesh from RedSys.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've been uniquely positioned as a software-centric vendor, having supplied software in both RAN and core for more than 3 decades now. And we've been working closely with our OEM partners, multiple chipset and technology partners. So the view we bring in, and whenever we go and work with many of these partners for the Open RAN deployments, there are a lot of lessons learned, and there is an accumulated knowledge base that we have built. And what we have seen is it is possible to achieve that performance and goals of all the cost reduction and everything with the right level of integration. And sometimes it requires a product-centric view. When I say that, having built those software and hardware components and the integration challenges of bringing in all the elements of integration, troubleshooting, isolating issues, it takes time, but it works best when we have the right set of partners to collaborate with. And the standards can help to an extent, but there is a collaboration that is needed over and beyond that. That has been our primary experience. And final thing I would like to say is that with all this being done, there is an element of operator involvement support that is required. And we work very closely with our sister company, Reliance Jio. Many of our learnings have come from working with such a large-scale operator. And that's also very, very essential for accelerating the deployment and achieving the use cases, whether it's called greenfield or brownfield. There's an element of collaboration that is always required.
Guy, just moving the topic on a little bit to brownfield networks, I mean, and RadSys working with operators that have other vendors and suppliers, how do you remove sort of any inter-vendor friction? Because I'm sure there isn't. I mean, everyone's happy to work with each other. But where is the inter-vendor? How do you manage that? How do you make sure it gets right? Because any friction there is going to delay that point of deployment and time to market.
Absolutely, and it goes to that interoperability and certification that they need to do on these platforms and work together, right? So we spend a lot of our time in working with the ecosystem, and I guess it's just education on how do you implement proper cloud native functions, right? How do you develop a common way to deploy and automate and adopt these GitOps and Devsecops principles. And when the ecosystem adopts more common frameworks in the way they do their deployments, then you remove a lot, at least the interoperability challenges. And then when you certify even more, you can get into a situation where you do remove a lot of that inter-vendor friction, just because on the surface and the manageability and how you touch the software, you have a lot more commonality.
Ganesh, inter-vendor friction. There isn't any, clearly.
So we participate regularly in all the Plugfest and Interop events hosted by ORAN and TIP. So it's very easy to get into an argument and get into the debate of who's right? And I think the industry has matured or moved on from the early stages, which is what I would say, from the early days of 2018, 2019 to where we are today. There is enough specification available, test specifications available, test vendors and tools who have brought in the capabilities to isolate issues, and then various levels of partnership that has happened in the industry has reduced the number of issues and variability or vagueness or ambiguity in the standards. All these have been addressed. But having said that, it is still not plug and play. There will be required collaboration and effort required to make things happen. But I think we have made tremendous progress in terms of how much it has improved in terms of making things work based on a particular set of standards, whether it's 3GPP, ORAN, or some of the de facto standards when it comes to the cloud world. And so I think we are learning at a fast rate as an industry is what I would say.
Do you see the same learning curve, David?
Oh, my word, yes. And I think the way I've really been able to look at it is we've seen these transitions towards these integrations in other areas. I think as we talked this morning, we've seen it with IP and voice and video and other communication systems. And it's really being able to, in a constructive manner, bring all these different systems together and have them available rather than paper exercises, real interoperability exercises. So we have a $600 million lab, actually gets even bigger every day, probably up to 700 by now. We have about 600 racks, actually 375 now, we're going up to almost 600 racks of equipment. So what that does is it allows us to bring in real time those different devices and show how those go together. And that's really the best part, the best way to have a constructive conversation with all the parties, a fair conversation, to say, look, we really need to see it this way, and this is probably a better way to do it for interoperability. And that really fosters a really good set of trust and understanding. And when people can see it right in front of themselves in a nonpartisan environment, it's like a neutral meet, right? When I was in telco, when we had a big problem, you'd have a vendor meet. Bring them all together, egos at the door, let's solve through this problem. And when we're able to foster that type of environment, you're able to learn a lot and able to move that system forward. And that's the learning, that's the process that we're going through. We're taking a lot of, if you will, secretive telco experience. So I did a lot of interoperability between vendors in the past, and we've just kind of make things work to get it out the door. But now, when you open it up and you're able to publicize it, and everybody can look at it, they say, hey, you know what, let's do it the right way, rather than working through these shortcuts to get something into market.
Thank you. Zita, now, Rakuten's been a greenfield. I mean, it's the greenfield poster person that you put up and actually look at and say, well, that's the way to do it, certainly on integration. But as Rakuten Symphony sort of breaks into the global market, and you're in different operators, do you see different vendor frictions coming up, and how do you actually make that transition to ensure that the model that you bring in Rakuten Symphony is well adopted?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we've been at this since 2018. And when we brought these various vendors together, and actually at the time I was working for one of those vendors that was brought in by Rakuten to play together. It was a lot of friction, right? First time you put these 4 or 5 people doing vRAN together, and I won't name the company names, but it was just, you can imagine it was a mess, right? But then, you know, it was that at the time Rakuten Mobile, the customer says, we're going to do this, right? So you guys have to get along, right? So, and make it work. And that's what happened. And so 2 years later, we launched our service. And so now when we go with, as Rakuten Symphony, as the solution provider's platform provider, we don't go in like theoretically, let's do Kumbaya and do these plug fests and everything, even though I think that's very useful. But we have a customer. So you say, we have this customer, we need these radios, for example, and we have to do interoperability testing. So that makes it much easier for everyone, because there is a customer, we have an object, a goal, a common goal that we are driving to. It's not a theoretical exercise. So that makes it much easier, because we're going after a common goal. So having this sister company that does the integration and sort of our lab, our big lab that has these 300,000 cells helps a lot. So when we want to bring a new innovation, we test it in Rakuten Mobile. If it works, then we bring it here. And because that's a customer for these vendors, they all get aligned. So it all works out nicely. So for us, the friction is lesser of a problem. Not that it goes away, but it's lesser of a problem.
And sticking to Rakuten for a moment about the, you know, we've talked a lot about the operational costs, and we're talking about, I really just don't want to talk about there's massive savings because you can automate anything. But has this accelerated the desire in operators, your customers, to actually want to actually make the transition quicker? Just changing the question a little bit, because I've heard a lot in the presentations about savings you can make.
Right.
It's not about the savings, it's about that inspiration that you actually probably see in the CTO's eye when he goes, we can actually see the benefits here. How does that push along the model?
One thing we all realize here is that when we talk about cloud native for telco networks, we're not talking about a centralized cloud, right? We're talking about edge cloud. And now we're not talking about a few, like 3 or 4 for resiliency that we put our core workloads on, but we're talking about vRAN with thousands of edge clouds out there. So just thinking about thousands of edge clouds and having manual operations, that's just not going to fly. There's no way you have enough people that can go in there and manage thousands of edge cloud sites manually and make the economics work. That just doesn't work. So then automation becomes a must. And then you take advantage of, as you were saying earlier, with this, you know, our SimWorld Cloud, which is based on the platform from a company we recently acquired, Robin.io. It puts the telco cloud optimization on top of Kubernetes. So it's able to place the workloads in the right places in the cloud, whether it's far edge, near edge, or centralized data centers. It's able to monitor that in a real-time basis. It does whole lifecycle management automatically. If a compute node fails, it moves all of its workloads to somewhere else. We've done updates. You were talking about updates earlier. Now we do updates for our site, which like overnight, 10,000 sites get updated. I mean, that in a traditional model, there's no way you can do that. So we think that all of that together, you can see that it reduces the operational cost.
Yeah, Dave, what do you think excites the CTO on the new operational models?
Well, I think there's 2 things here. One is the flexibility of suppliers. So being able to go to ORAN and look at multiple suppliers and be able to get kind of the best radio and best consortium for the deal that the problem they're going after. But the other really interesting thing is the amount of APIs and openness of the different systems. So we talked a little bit this morning, if we were in a different session, about a RIC. And then we also didn't talk as much about what 5GSA gives you. But this is really where we're able to start to open up the radio infrastructure and do more with it rather than just voice and data. And that really is that top line growth. So, you know, I have 2 mantras. how does this, in any project that we work on, I ask, how is this going to either make money or save money? And if we can't answer any one of those questions, we're not doing it, right? So save money is supplier diversity. Make money is I can offer new applications and services integrated over my radio network. So what I mean by that would be, let's say, I used the example earlier of if I'm on a Teams meeting on my cell phone and I start sounding like a robot, well, it would be great if I could just turn on a QCI-1 or 5IQ-1 and change that around so I don't sound like that anymore. 5GSA is going to allow that to happen, and you can charge for that. That's actually a really interesting area. Same thing for industrial automation, other function will come that way. That's that top line growth, because we all see all the operators, and I think one of the reasons why Rakuten's looking at this too is there's new data and commercial capabilities to go after, but you need to find those new revenue opportunities, and I think 5G, the ORAN system, is going to allow for a lot of that creativity to move forward. And we've seen that with other solutions too. I mean, anytime just a few years ago, you used to have a set-top box, and now I've got Google YouTube, or YouTube TV on my device. I don't have to have a set-top box anymore. Really innovated the market. So we're looking for more things like that to come around. And that's the possible. That's where that's the reason why people want to invest in that and move forward on it.
Thanks, Dave. Ganesh?
Yeah, adding on to what he just said, right? So I think we are going through a transformative era wherein it is not just about, there are fundamental principles which we are applying, hardware, software decoupling, more cloud nativeness, open interfaces, multi-vendor changeability, interchangeability, and all these things. But these are foundational principles which we are applying. But the real benefits and value are coming from making the entire network programmable, RAN, core, and there's going to be more innovation possible. In our view, the RIC entities are going to be the center of innovation, allowing you to create new applications, new services, enabling you to monetize the network in many ways which was not possible earlier in the earlier generation of the technology. 5G perfectly aligns in terms of its arrival on the newly programmable network. And I think that's what will enable operators and enterprises to take advantage of all the programmability and automation that is there in the network. And telco networks will start looking more like the IT networks, but telco networks can bring in a great deal of capacity, connectivity, and intelligence. And that is unprecedented, and that's going to lead us into the foundations of 6G. We are already seeing the basic principles being brought into the thinking in 6G, including the energy saving, sustainable energy, and all these things.
Thank you. Guy?
For us, it's about common operations. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about yet is just hyperscalers. And hyperscalers are playing a role in Cloud RAN, right? So maybe the DU needs to be on-prem, and that's great. But that cloud-native platform that you're using in the DU, that same platform can be used and run also your core. It can run your IT infrastructure. It can run your OSS, BSS. So you have that common platform across your entire network. But you can also take those workloads and move them into public cloud and start taking advantage of actual hardware that is deployed and run by these public cloud vendors in areas where you yourself probably did not have locations yet. And so you can start expanding to the public cloud, move some of those workloads using that same operational framework, that same platform that you use, whether you're on-prem or whether you're in the cloud. And I think when you have that common environment, then you can really reduce the skills training and also just the operational costs of running your system, because it doesn't matter where you're actually running your workloads. You're doing it all in a similar way.
Thanks. Ganesh, just changing a little, because we've talked about the sort of the cost structures, we've talked about the skill sets, resources that an integrated Open RAN solution actually brings. But the most exciting thing must be time to market. how quickly can services be brought to market? What's the, how quickly can you get reach in actually the services, or even fault rectification? Must be happening a lot quicker these days than I remember. I used to have to go out to sites and change cards, every single time. Does that all go away, or is it a myth?
So one thing is like the extreme level of softwareization that is happening, whether it's the hardest part is thought to be the radio or the file layer. Right from there's a lot of software now in the network, and all the way up to the controlling entities like the orchestrator and the network management. And the whole network management itself, the philosophy of network management itself is going through a huge change. That ecosystem is going through a huge change. And a lot of it is being driven now with a fully automated fashion and with all the ability to bring in new features right from taking a DevOps approach, continuously testing and pushing out features, frequent upgrades possible at a node level, feature level. And earlier, the cycle used to be probably 9 months or 12 months to upgrade a network with one feature, right? And that's going to change for sure. And the ability to bring in new features at a faster pace, and then it's the new abilities, whether it's, we are now looking at release 15 networks most of the time, and we're going into release 16, release 17 and beyond. We're going to see a faster velocity of how features get enabled, services get enabled, not just for the public networks, even for the private networks as well.
And do you think we're going to see an operating system for networks?
Right, yeah.
Almost getting there.
Yeah.
Dave?
I see the acceleration coming along, and I see a pent-up demand from a lot of applications or suppliers. So again, I go back to our lab. We have a tremendous amount of apps and services that vendors bring into our labs to test and integrate against. And then we have all these customers who are saying, hey, I want it this way. And we're seeing that desire, and this open system promises the ability to bring a lot of those apps and systems over this relatively quickly. And it's starting to prove that capability out. I mean, it is kind of early days in certain cases to bring those on board and put those forward. But boy, it's just an avalanche. The chatter's there. People really want to invest in this. And we have daily meetings with utilities, with retail centers, we actually do all Panera Bread's systems. We actually write the application there for it. And they're all looking towards this wireless. People want to get off of wired and onto wireless. It's far easier to move things around. And there's a pent-up demand just to be able to have that availability and flexibility over their systems that to date with our 3G, 4G had some of it, but 5G really, and 5G O-RAN with really good understanding of how the radio access network works, and you can program against it. Now you can start to have an application that can ask the network all the way out to the radio, out to the device, and say, yeah, I'm going to get that quality of service. This is really cool stuff. And we have a lot of folks that just, they can't make it happen fast enough.
Yeah, this has been a big issue that operators in a marketplace which have been set up for competition are a little bit samey. It's all data rate plans, but the ability to get that network information, that network context, is just going to have everyone going from a different position. But and that's the competition.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that I planned that sort of thing, but Rakuten's a clear example on how you've been looking at your data and getting time to market just from the flexibility that these systems, Open RAN systems, have brought to you. Can you explain
exactly,
a little
right?
bit more?
So we have this layer we call intelligent operations. You can think of it as next generation OSS. Yeah. And we have a suite of applications that help with planning the network, building the network, and running the network. So sometimes it's called day 0, day 1, day 2 operations, right? And all of those take full advantage of automation. So we want to be a fully autonomous network at one point. We are about 70–75% there now. So I'll give you some examples of how that happens. So for example, for us, a cell site activation takes under 5 minutes. And it's like 4 minutes that does that. But you talked about a fault, right? Like a fault that comes in. And that's all programmable. You could say, based on this KPI, based on this, based on that, this is what is a fault that is considered. And then the trouble ticket gets generated automatically. Then the trouble ticket correlates that to a RCA, root cause analysis for that, and then it picks up the next best action. And then, so that whole cycle is now automated. So when there are outages in the network, and there will always be outages, it just takes care of it automatically. A lot of these just go away. So we don't need to send someone out there to do the work, and they can do something more productive. So I think this whole, and then the whole observability thing. You know, we think EMS, as you mentioned earlier, is a 4-letter word, right? We want to do away with EMS. But of course, right now, as people are going through the transition from the traditional to the new, this layer of SimWorld, whether it's SimWorld for planning the network, we call SimBuild, SimOps, and SimPlan, they will deal with physical network functions, with virtual network functions, with cloud-native network functions. They can work with all of that, but eventually, those EMSs will go away. So then we have this observability framework that then looks at all these telemetry data real time that comes directly from the network functions. You don't have to have this extra box in there for EMS.
Guy, Red Hat must be really excited about the time to market and being able to provide new services to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all about helping to accelerate that time to market. And for us, it's about integrating with the partners, right? I mean, if we can integrate properly with the partners, then we're going to be able to provide that accelerated time to market for them.
Well, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Azita, Dave, Ganesh, and Guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.